Well, let me start then by welcoming you to this year's Distinguished Scholar panel. Again, so sad that we are not all in the same room, but here we are, and at least we're able to span a lot of different countries and time zones, because we're lucky to have someone extremely international to be honoring today. When Fari suggested nominating Frank, I was completely over the moon with his nomination and with the prospect of actually doing a panel in his honor at ISA today. So I've known Frank for a long time, since we were postdoctoral fellows together at Kennedy School at Harvard many years ago. And we've known each other ever since. And I would say, because other people will speak to his work, just his incredible work at field building, mentoring, and creating communities, intellectual communities that ISA is one thing. I always see us as kind of this very sort of scrappy, come together, fall apart, never really quite get our act together group, which has its own joys, but just the sheer pleasure of being part of the environmental study systems governance community and going to those conferences and knowing just the work that you put in setting up a journal, a book series, a community that really feels truly international in a way that very few others of my communities actually do, really, and to create an organization that lasts. I think the sign of a really great leader is to be able to generate a real transition from their own leadership to the next generation. And I just feel like that's a sort of a hallmark of one of the things that you've been doing. Thank you for putting me on to presenting somebody. But yes, your incredible intellectual reach, your generosity, your role in building that global community that is ESG. Just want to thank you. So thrilled we can honor you today, and I'm going to pass on to Fari.
Thanks a lot, Kate. Not sure if I will be on this bigger screen now presenting, but wherever I am, I hope you can see me. Frank, among your many achievements, I think you clearly deserve this award for what you've done to build and strengthen our community, as Kate has just said. A community of scholars that work on the governance of global environmental change. And I think one of the ways in which you've done that, strengthening that community, amongst the many things that Kate just mentioned, building up the journal, building up the conferences, building up ESG, is that you're simply leading by example. Frank is someone who truly loves what he's doing. I mean, he truly loves research, and he truly loves supporting other researchers that work on the same cause, a cause that he deeply believes in. So what I always admire about Frank, I don't know too many people who have that, is that when Frank gives a speech on climate change or sustainable development goals, it always feels like he just got the news. He wants to go straight into action. Oh my God, climate change, what do we do? He's enthused, and he enthuses other people. There is no trace of cynicism or frustration, traits that I used to run into a lot with colleagues who work on environmental and development matters. Let's not kid ourselves. I mean, one of them greets me from the mirror many a day. Frank Biermann is the opposite of that. He's the opposite of cynicism. He meets challenges with a natural energy as if it was the easiest thing to do, while in fact it is the hardest. I'm privileged to have experienced that force of nature that Frank is so often, to be lifted up by it from the early days of my career onwards. And I know I should not talk too much. I'll just give two quick examples that Frank will remember very well. The first one was when I did my PhD exam in the city of Tübingen in Germany. I had been working for Volker Rittberger, a very respected scholar, brilliant, but also extremely strict, demanding, hierarchical. And here I was facing my defense with him actually grading my defense. And the other person in the room was Frank, right? But I was nervously walking around Tübingen, feeling the nervousness boiling up in my bloodstream. And then I arrive at the main square in Tübingen, this beautiful old village square with half-timbered houses. And there's Frank sitting in the sun. It was one of the first warm days of the year, about this time of the year. Sun in his face, outdoor seat in a cafe, flipping through my thesis as if it was some novel or sports paper. It was coolness. Frank was cool. Relaxed. I mean, when I quickly found my way to his seat, he saw me and said, "Fari Boris, this is a cute town. Maybe I'll take a job here one day." And without any trace of arrogance, whatever, and that put it all into perspective for me. And I guess I've never been closer to Buddha in my whole academic life than in the exam that followed that encounter with him there. So the other story is when I did my postdoc after that exam in England, I got caught up in a work on an appraisal framework, a new kind of theory we wanted to do, and it was called the Policy Appraisal Framework. The acronym of that was the PAF, P-A-F. Some of you have been involved, Philip's been involved. Let's just say that framework had gone terribly wrong before it ever saw the light of day. But still, I'd been employed to employ it. And my actual boss at the time was not Frank. My boss was the only remaining person on the planet that still utterly believed in that thing, in that framework. No wonder it was his brainchild, basically. And we had this one meeting where Frank was present, Philip was present, others were this gentleman in his enthusiasm, he pointed at me and said, and Fari is going to implement this, but instead he pointed at me and said, Puffy is going to implement this, using the word of that framework. So instead of Fari, I was suddenly Puffy. It was a nightmare to work in that. What Frank did, especially after that traumatic experience, which made him laugh a lot anyway. I mean, he still calls me Puffy every now and then when we have a beer or some wine, usually accompanied by his charming, exactly that laugh and a glowingly red face. And but I was trapped in that puff, you know, and although he wasn't my boss, he wasn't my line manager, he bailed me out of it. He did his magic to help me change my role in that program, and I was Puffy no more, and I became Fari again. So thank you, Frank, my mentor and friend, for having my back at those and so many other times, for mixing splendor with down-to-earthness, brilliance with a complete lack of arrogance, and leadership with enthusiasm for other people and what they have to say. Or to say it with Plato and Robin Williams at the same time, thank you for helping me steer my ship, Frank. Oh, Captain, my captain. We try to be representative with this panel today, geographically and in many other ways, but as our good common friend Stefan Bauer observed, putting together a roundtable for Frank always looks like sheer nepotism. So we have friends everywhere. So we easily found a great mix of friends, colleagues, students, mentors, admirers, groupies, wives, some of them all of the above. I think I just hand it over. I mean, you see who's present. It's Michel Betzel, Peter Duverne, Michel Scobie, Oren Young, Philip Putberg, Arti Gupta. It's a great pleasure and privilege to be here with you to honor Frank. Thank you.
One logistical question. Who's keeping time?
Yeah, not me. I can if you
All right, let me grab my...
Yeah, I would already be non-credible, but if you like, I can do from now. Should I?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. Okay.
If you have a hard time, pass it over to me.
Yeah. Then shall we go with, I think Michel is the first on the list. Michel Betzel, if you like.
Yep. Right, and I have my own stopwatch going here, but I'll try to be brief. So thank you to Fari for initiating this nomination. And yeah, I'm really pleased to be invited to be here. Like Kate, I was sort of thinking about when I first met Frank, and I don't really remember. I think that we were running in similar circles be it the environmental studies section here at ISA, the Global Environmental Assessment Project, or the institutional dimensions of global environmental change. We're sort of, in the same networks. But I clearly remember one particular conversation that we had in 2006 in Bali at it was the synthesis conference for the institutional dimensions of global environmental change program. And as that program was wrapping up, Frank was leading the initiative to sort of find out what was going to be sort of the next generation. And he took me aside outside of one of the conference rooms and asked me what I thought about this new initiative. And I don't really remember what I said substantively, but I distinctly remember saying, I thought the term Earth system governance was ridiculous, that it wouldn't stick, it was nonsensical, it didn't make any sense. I didn't know what it was referring to, and no one it would never bring people to the table. For some reason, I must have said some nice things about the rest of the project, but despite that, Frank invited me to be part of the planning committee and eventually the steering committee for what has become the Earth System Governance Project. And it's been such an honor and joy and a learning experience to really be on the inside of watching this process unfold of building this community, which I think is really why we're here. I mean, this is, I think what's interesting about this particular recognition is that we're not here because of any particular piece of work that Frank has done. You look at his Google Scholar profile and it's, incredibly impressive, but I think for me, that doesn't capture really what his legacy is at this point of building the ESG community, as many people have observed. And agree with Kate, the fact that there's now been a handoff to a next generation of leaders in the project is truly a testament to his leadership. Frank and I spent a lot of time together between 2007 and 2018. And what I came to learn and appreciate about Frank, he's a dreamer. He thinks big. He's driven by a true commitment to make the world a better place. He doesn't let sort of bureaucratic inconveniences get in his way. If he has an idea and wants to make something happen, he's going to do it. And at the same time, I think he has this interesting combination of both being able to think at sort of that 10,000 foot or 10,000 meter level, but also work out the details. I mean, he's really meticulous and can micromanage when it's when it's necessary, and can think about how to really make things happen. And I remember sitting in multiple meetings when Frank would be like, now we're going to have this very detailed process of identifying research fellows and putting this into place. And I don't know if, I think sometimes I expressed it, but you could probably see this sort of air of skepticism around my head of like, oh, this one's not going to work. This one's not going to work. And yet we'd come to the next steering committee meeting and he'd be like, here's how many people have gone through this process. And we now have 50 new research fellows. He's a skillful convener, brings people together, creates opportunities for new ideas to emerge. And I think he's also really, really gracious with being open to, lots of people's ideas. So obviously Frank has his own intellectual interests and preferences and research agenda, but he's really open and truly welcoming to those who come from different disciplines, maybe have ideas that are different than his, and research approaches and worldviews. And I think that has permeated through the ESG community and really is, leadership by example. I think what I appreciate most, I think, of the time that we spent together was just some of the friendships and adventures that we had as we literally traveled the world together. So, I was just thinking about some of the highlights. Bali, of course, a workshop in Japan at a traditional ryokan hotel where we were invited to have dinner in our kimonos and enjoying the hospitality of Drunkard's Alley in Tokyo after the ESG conference. We searched for kangaroos in Canberra. We celebrated Frank's birthday in Nairobi. So those are just really nice memories. And when I started writing my notes for this presentation, I was going to end my remarks by reminding Frank of our plans to establish an ESG retirement community in Bali. And I was going to say it was these memories of friendship that I was going to be reflecting on as we sat on our beach chairs, eating our big plates of fruit and enjoying the scenery. But literally last week, I got an email from Frank. He invited me to be part of a possible new initiative that he's cooking up within the ESG network. And I want to quote from the email. ESG should think big and ambitious in bringing together the leading scholars on this particular issue. And then the email came with a 3-page detailed concept note about his idea. So for the moment, I'm pushing aside the retirement plans in Bali. And of course I said yes. And I'm very excited to see where this wild ride will take us next. So congratulations, Frank. And again, thank you for letting me be part of the building the community.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Yeah, I think I should keep moderating then. Sorry about this. Shall we say Peter is next? Peter? And I think you need
muted.
yourself, Peter. Peter, you now put Philip on the presenter screen. I already got the impression you like playing around with it, but please don't overdo it. Okay, so you still need to unmute yourself. Then we hear you.
So I'm the technological person, but clearly doing a very poor job, everybody. Well, what a true honor for me to have the opportunity to celebrate Frank and all his exceptional accomplishments. And so, Frank, I actually can't remember exactly when we first met, but it's been a true honor for me. And perhaps my memory is lagging, and you can remind me, because you seem to know everybody and have an extraordinary capacity to link with people and remember people and make people feel part of your community. So, you know, I'm not sure there's anybody at the ISA who hasn't had a wonderful interaction with you and support from you. And you're just really an exceptional and remarkable mentor, not just to colleagues like myself, but to students. Just the amount of co-authoring that you do with your students and your colleagues, it's something I've always admired and just have tried to actually model my own career off of. It's just a kind of stunning example of trying to work together and think together and come up with solutions together. And it's just led to just an amazing amount of influential and important scholarship for the global environmental change community, and all of us here know that. As Michelle mentioned, your Google citations right now are just kind of a tribute to just how much all of us are reading your work and learning from your work. And I'm not sure I publish anything anymore where I don't cite you multiple times, Frank. So a real tribute to you for all of that. Sometimes I wonder, honestly, Frank, whether you even sleep, because your energy is just kind of stunning, which, you know, as Michelle said, you know, where did the 3-page memo come from? Because for those of you who aren't following Frank's career right now, and don't get intimidated, all the junior scholars watching here, no one actually is trying to have the level of influence that Frank is having, except for Frank himself. So don't all of you do this, right? But you know, he has 18 books and 200 articles. But what I thought was really interesting is I figured that, like me, maybe his brain is starting to get a bit foggy and he's slowing down a little bit. So I was actually looking, Frank, I did a little research on you just to see if you are slowing down. I was kind of actually hoping you were slowing down actually a little bit, so the rest of us could retire with Michelle in this community. So I looked at, you know, since 2020, just to get a sense of what he's been up to. And well, since 2020, all right, he's published 23 journal articles and chapters and books, and 4 already in 2021. So somehow, Frank, you're accelerating and going at a remarkable pace here. And that's really quite something. And one of the things that I think is really just exceptional about that is how you do that with such an incredible amount of enthusiasm. You're always smiling. You're always making people feel good about the fact that the world is in an extraordinarily escalating crisis, and the kind of optimism, your ability to dream and think big is kind of infectious and confuses us all with energy. And so deeply grateful to that, Frank. And so I was reflecting on my remarks, and I thought I can come up with at least 6 qualities that I really admire. And I tried to actually make it into an acronym. I'm not as adept at this kind of thing as you, Frank, and so it isn't an acronym, but I do think there's kind of 6 qualities of your influence on our field and why you deserve this honor so much. The first one is just the exceptional originality of everything you work on. Your scholarship is just always at the cutting edge, and it's always critical, but also solution oriented, and has a big infused element of scholar activism to it, and just incredibly admire that originality. The second kind of quality of your work and your influence is what I think about as a fearless interdisciplinarity. You just have no fear going into other disciplines, crossing, you know, the sciences, but also in the social sciences, political science, law, sociology, geography, the environmental sciences, environmental studies, you know, and it just seems every time humanities, a lot of work in the environmental humanities, bringing us all together, but also yourself reading and doing that. And it's just something I think that we can all learn from, quite exceptional. A third quality that I really admire in your work, Frank, is what I think about as honest scholar activism, right? A lot of us, you know, we get drawn into scholar activism, and when we get a little bit, well, you know, grand in how we're thinking. Your scholar activism is just kind of from the heart and just really straightforward. And I glanced at your website, and I thought, yeah, kind of the leading remark that you have, I thought I'd read it out to all the young scholars. It's just kind of a way to say how much you just have this wonderful energy, right? So you write on your website, quote, political and legal research for a world that is more equal, less wasteful, more inclusive, and in balance with nature, right? And just kind of says it all, you know, right? Very normative, but you believe big, and you think big, and you aim big, and really that's quite exceptional. And I admire it, right? It's hard to always stay optimistic, and those of us at our age, Frank, sometimes there are days when you think, oh, what kind of difference is it all making? You never seem to exude that, but some of us do think that, right? A fourth kind of quality of your scholarship, which I think is why you're so influential, is what I think about is genuine global analysis, right? A lot of us stay at the very international level, or they stay inside case studies, or they stay inside sectors, right? And they work in their whole careers there. You just do everything, right? And you do it from a local to global and global to local, and you bring in extraordinary range of countries in the global south. You study Europe, you study the global north, and you look at international institutions, the World Environment Organization, et cetera, and you're one of the only people I can think of that is just across it all. And again, that's really hard, right? And many of us, we get safe and comfortable in where we're at, and not you just, you know, right off, right? A fifth kind of exceptional quality that I've always admired since kind of day one, we first had a glass of wine together, is just what I think about as remarkable collaboration. I can't think of anybody else collaborating at the level you're collaborating. Not, of course, just co-authoring together, but also bringing us together into a community, and bringing the Earth System Governance group together, and bringing us together through the editorships of your journal that you founded, but also of your book series, right? And just also through just the networking, through conferences and through events like today. And you just are always, you know, kind of warm and welcoming, and it's just a stunning feature of your career. And then finally, the sixth quality that I think is the one that we get with your smile, and I think everyone on the panel would say this, right? Is what I think about is never-ending curiosity. There's always something that you're excited about. There's always some new topic and new area of research, new part of governance that you're trying to explore, new angles, new concepts, new questions. Really quite something. And for those of you who aren't following Frank's latest research, maybe haven't read his 23 pieces that have come out so far since 2020, or the 200 or so that he's recently had, I had the chance at the ESG conference in Mexico to hear Frank present his article called "The Future of Environmental Policy in the Anthropocene, Time for a Paradigm Shift," an article that just came out in the journal Environmental Politics. And if you want just a flavor of kind of Frank's ambition and his boldness and the way he thinks, take a look at this article, right? This article is making a case that the whole concept of environmental policy needs to be rethought. The whole idea of environment is actually causing us problems, and he gives us kind of core reasons that why this concept of environmental policy is failing, and then kind of walks us through systematically in a very powerful way why that's the case. But then it's so typical of Frank's scholarship, and why I end up assigning these articles to all my graduate students. Sometimes I think my entire graduate course curriculum is just Frank. Is he then turns to, well, what do we do? And he says, you know, we can't just toss away all the environmental institutions and the policies that come from the concept of environment and the whole history since early 1970s of environment. We need to just modify, rethink, challenge, reform, try and move forward with new, more radical ideas, more radical concepts. And he proposes a way forward. And so that is, I think, really wonderful. So I hope those remarks give you just a flavor of the exceptional quality and importance of what Frank's doing. Also his kindness, his gentleness, his and all the extraordinary reasons that he deserves this distinguished scholar honor. And just as a final remark, Frank, I wanted you also to know that I'm really looking forward to reading your next 18 books and your next 200 articles. and you should know that I'm hoping those will be out in the next couple of years at the rate you're going. So I'll try and be able to read as fast as you publish, but I'm hoping to do it. So congratulations, Frank. Really a great honor and so well deserved. Congratulations.
Thank you so much, Peter. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. I liked it when you said, please, young scholars at home, don't think you have to fulfill that statement. Frank's work, it reminds me of these TV shows where you see these extreme sports people, and then the moderator says, the host, please don't repeat this at home. Don't do this at home. Philip, up next. Peter, can you make
I
it
can,
presenter?
yeah. I have to find him. Where are you, Philip? We've got so many people on the panel. Oh, there we go. We got him.
Yeah, thanks. So first of all, Frank, hello and Glückwunsch, congratulations. It's a great honor to be here. Thank you to Kate and Firebot for organizing, everyone watching. So I'm actually here to present a study that I did. It's not really a paper. I didn't have time to write it down because of all the COVID going on, but it is actually a study I've been pursuing the last 20 years. So it's a longitudinal study, NS1. It is very much based on my participatory observation and some desk research. It's mainly actually participatory observation, some interviews. And the study will be called, I will read the title, The 5 Necessary Conditions for Being Frank Biermann, a very, very preliminary assessment, because there's a lot to follow. And you can become Frank, of course, but these 5 factors, and some echo what Peter just said, will tremendously help being more like Frank. So you might, before I start, you might say, what are my credentials actually? And they're few, but one is I met Frank actually 20 years to the day. It was on the 9th of April, 20 years in 2001 when I met Frank in Potsdam. And I found the letter I wrote. It's a real letter, and I have the draft. I found this letter I wrote to introduce myself to you, Frank. Yeah. Still the time we wrote letters. And I came to Potsdam, and I walked up to the second floor of the C4 building and to introduce myself. I had this black suit and the tie. And Frank was sitting in the last office on the left, and he was in a white shirt, I think, it was really hot that day, and I was totally overdressed. And anyway, the rest is sort of why we're here. But so really, really nice 20 years. That's one of my credentials. So the 5 necessary conditions to become Frank Biermann. The first one is the boundless optimism you need to be Frank. I mean, this is really something we heard a lot, and I can just second that. I never heard you complain about something. You never thought there is a problem. Every problem was a challenge to overcome and something that we could do better. You're very sportive, so you always like the challenge, and so your optimism was really driving all of us. I tremendously enjoy that. I'm more the pessimist, so I always think what goes wrong, and Frank isn't, so I enjoy that. So the second ingredient you really need is, and we heard that as well, and I think it's so obvious, is that Frank is a team player. He's a team former. He's a mentor. He is a tremendous inventor of titles. So I remember when we just started out, everyone had a title. So, director of coffee making or copy making, something like that. And this really gave us this sort of community feel you need. And I think it's a tremendous skill you have to make everyone feel part of the team. And so this is great. I was never sure if we were, like a football club or anyway, but I think we were like a soccer team, basically. So the third thing you need to be a bit like Frank is his language. You need Frank's language, and I don't mean German, by the way, but I mean special terminology. And I will not reveal all the things I study, but 2 important concepts everyone needs to know. The first one, the scope of the challenge. So I bet there's not a single or very few presentations of Frank that do not contain the important concept of the scope of the challenge. I'm never sure what it actually meant, but it tremendously enthused me. The second thing is actually on a bit deeper intellectual level. One thing I learned from Frank, really a political science insight, is whatever you study, try to figure out effectiveness of something, accountability, legitimacy, access, allocation, whatnot. The answer is always, it depends. And I've so much internalized that I sort of am not putting out stuff at the pace of 20 articles because I still try to figure out, it always depends on the context. So these two things you need to remember conceptually, language-wise. Now, the fourth point is a bit more serious now, and it has been echoed. Frank is a tremendous visionary in terms of what the next big scientific question is. And I actually have a proof of that. So if you only thought I brought a letter, no, I actually have found in my, wherever I found it, I have found the original Frank's handwriting, the original concept of my PhD. Because when we sat down that day in Potsdam, Frank pulled out this blank sheet and he said, you know what? There's this FSC, I don't know what it is, sort of private, figure it out. And he gave me this, and a couple of years later, I wrote a book about it. And Frank has this tremendous ability to come up with stuff, agency, architecture, allocation, access, and he's always, in my impression, really at the forefront of scholarship. The fifth point, the fifth ingredient that you really need to be a bit more like Frank, and this is, I think, for me, the most important, actually, why I was always so, why Frank is in a way really a role model for me. And I really immediately took to him was he's not only a political scientist, Frank is actually much more a political person. So, I mean, I'm not sure if I might share that, but on the 1st of May in Berlin, what Frank would do is he would put out a red flag out of his window. And so I think to the very day, Frank is someone who cares for people and the planet. It really cares because it's about politics and he tries to influence that. And I second what has been said. It's absolutely free of cynicism, which is another great quality. So I hope that you can use my study, although I will do more research on Frank in the next years. I think you can use my study. So if you follow those 5 important conditions, I think you will be a bit closer. But let me be clear, no one can be like Frank. And so I think this distinction today is very special. So again, Frank, congratulations, very, very well deserved.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Philip. Gives the whole phrase "to be frank" a whole new meaning. Michelle Scobie, you're next.
Well, good afternoon, good morning, everyone, and I'm really pleased to be part of this distinguished Scholar Roundtable honoring Frank. And like some of you have known Frank for a while, I think not as long as most of you have. And I thought, what can I bring to this panel? You know, well, first I'd like to say, before I say what I can bring to this panel, is that this is long overdue, you know. I would have thought that this happened, I don't know, 10 years ago, you know, because of all of these things that we all know about Frank, you know, and I think that speaks to his humility in just being around and normal when he probably should have been a distinguished scholar, like, I don't know, a long time ago. So, and I think that others have spoken to his innovativeness, his rigor in his work, the creativity of his ideas, the prolific nature of his work, his brilliance in writing. And I thought, what can I bring to this panel, you know? And one of the things that I think that sort of unique in terms of what I can bring to this panel is that I can bring the perspective of a scholar from a developing state that has interacted with Frank both at the research level and at the coordinating the ESG community level. So I still remember when I met Frank, and it speaks, there are few people in the world that I know like that, you know. I am a developing state scholar with my ideas from a small island developing state. And Frank is busy at ESG Colorado conference with lots of things to do. And he actually had some time to listen to what I had to say. Now, that sounds normal, but it's not so normal, you know. I think that it speaks to his willingness to reach out to everyone, to build a community, not just theoretically or so that it suits him, but he's genuinely concerned. And that I think is something that, on behalf of the developing state scholars in ESG, Frank, thank you. So that was the first meeting, you know, and that was confirmed after that all through the years. Two things that I'd like to point to that sort of cement this: his character and his demeanor. Many of you have spoken about his very enthusiastic approach. I don't know if you've ever noticed, but he punctuates his proposals, his statements with good. You know, he would say good at the end of at the end of something which might be crazy, difficult, and somehow that gives people the encouragement to make it happen, to go with him, to execute those ideas, to collaborate, to be interested in what he has to say. Yeah? And with that approach, he has managed to build not a cold, dry academic community, but a place where scholars call home. And there's a difference between just character, which is just what you're born with, and virtue, which is what you develop. And I really think that his consistent approach to good is virtue. And for that, thank you, Frank. The second thing that I'd like to point to, as somebody coming from the developing, from the global south, is his coherence. You know, many scholars speak about justice and environmental governance, and it's not that easy for a developing state scholar. You know, people find it crazy when I tell them that, you know, I don't have access to many journal articles because my university can't afford the subscriptions to all journals, you know. It's not that easy to participate in global debates. And I think many people understand the challenges of the less able, you know, be they developing states, least developed states, young scholars, future generations, they all fall into a category that Frank somehow manages to pay attention to, even while he's paying attention to everything else. And that is something that we all want, I think. We all want to be inclusive. But to be able to do that all the time is a coherence that I really admire Frank for, you know. Always impressed by the clarity in his work, and when he speaks about his understanding the particular challenges of these groups. And I think he makes it so easy that sometimes we don't appreciate that that's not that easy to be coherent all the time. He understands that it's not that easy for developing states, scholars to participate, and he helps to bridge that gap. He understands how Eurocentric some discussions in our community can be. A few times I've had conversations with him after some of the sessions in ESG or ISA, where he appreciates the Eurocentric tone that comes across and is interested in another way of looking at these debates. And that's coherence. It's not just something that he speaks about theoretically, but he's interested in personally. And that requires intellectual brilliance, moral fortitude to keep all those perspectives in his head, and then to orchestrate a combination that allows the voices of mainstream and other perspectives to come through in his work. And for that, thank you. But Frank takes that to a practical level, and I'm glad nobody mentioned it so I could talk about it. Who does an ESG conference in Africa? I mean, who does that? You know, it sounds easy, but it was not easy. And Frank made that with his usual good seem like the easiest thing in the world, you know? It was admirable, it was memorable. The logistics were heroic. The value for the students and the intellectuals in Kenya, that was invaluable. And to do something like that, to have a goal and to actually achieve it, it left a lot with the university there, it left a lot with the people of Kenya. And it also, I think, left a lot in the minds of all the people that participated in that conference, that if you want to, you can make something as difficult as managing the logistics in a developing state with a conference that until then had generally been held in, let's say, easier areas to manage. It was truly memorable. So he takes that approach to inclusiveness, the grand ideas, and he puts it into practice in his own research, but also in his own life. And I admire the way, and that's one of the first things I told him in Colorado, I admire his concern for justice and his ways of trying to solve those or achieve justice, you know, whether it is to give UNEP more power or his more forceful approach to the ban on unilateral action on solar radiation management or whatever. So to end, I think that the purpose of a panel like this is that it allows us to admire and celebrate, but it also invites us to reflect on how we can emulate some of those qualities in our own lives. And again, on behalf of the entire community, but perhaps on behalf of the people from developing states, the least developed countries, and the young scholars. Thank you, Frank, for your mentorship, your enthusiasm, your interest, and your leadership. Thank you.
Oh, wonderful. Thanks very much, Michelle. Then the next speaker is Oren Young. Oren, please.
Thank you, Fari. Well, it's really a pleasure to hear all these stories and to reflect on how richly deserved all these expressions of appreciation for Frank are. I'd like to take my few minutes just to add a few personal reflections or comments on some of the history that we've shared together. The first is to do with launching the Earth System Governance Project. We'll take you back, as Michelle observed, to Bali in 2006. So the Earth System Governance Project originated as a core project of the International Human Dimensions Program. And it was initially a successor to a program called the Institutional Dimensions of Global Environmental Change, which I had led from the late 1990s. And at that point, it came time to make a transition, to finish the initial project and to move on. And so we wanted to form a transitional team, a planning team for the next project. And it became clear to me very early on that Frank was the person to lead this initiative for all the reasons that many people here have been pointing out, because of all the qualities that Philip listed. So Frank and I had this relationship in the transitional stage, and we often spoke about what's the relationship between the Institutional Dimensions Project and the emerging Earth System Governance Project. And our formula that we always had was same, but different. And that, I think, became the kind of mantra. So yes, a continued expression of interest in institutions, governance, but different, distinctive, critically so. And the genius that Frank brought to this was his understanding of the importance of identifying priority themes. If you're going to build a long-term project with a programmatic focus, it needs priority themes. And that was the origin of the 5 A's. In some respects, a little bit of a gimmick, but nevertheless, absolutely critical to have this set of focal topics that I think became the structuring agenda for years to come. And so in the years after Bali in 2006, there was negotiating the International Human Dimensions Program process, which I can tell you because by that time I had become the chair of the scientific committee of the program. It was very complex and required patience, required skill, required persistence. And Frank was able to bring all of those qualities to this challenging task in an extremely effective way. And it's one of the proudest achievements for me as chair of the scientific committee to have been the chair when we approved formally and officially the launching of the Earth System Governance Project, initially as an IHDP core project. obviously it's evolved since then into much more. So a second example, I would call it living with future Earth. I'm not sure how many people day to day in the Earth system governance community know that, formally speaking, the Earth System Governance Project is a core project of something called Future Earth. So what the hell is Future Earth? Future Earth is a program that emerged from an effort on the part of the leadership of the various Earth System Governance, various global change research programs, IGBP, IHCP, Diversitas, and so on, to break down the barriers of disciplinary structures. And we had started early on with something called the Earth System Science Partnership. That had morphed into something called Future Earth. In many respects, I think that Future Earth, in retrospect, is an experiment, a noble experiment, that in some respects failed, but nevertheless, the Earth System Governance Project is still a core project of Future Earth. And this has required over the years a dance of operating on two planes at the same time, being a core project of this thing called Earth System Governance, while at the same time we all know the Earth System Governance Project is much more than that. It has this huge community, this huge life of its own. But it's been a really extraordinary exercise in leadership to be able to maintain, on the one hand, this relationship with Future Earth, while at the same time operating independently as an important autonomous project of its own. And I give Frank enormous credit for being able to maintain that delicate balance. A third example is, many of you will know that Frank and I together have been the editorial advisors for the MIT Press book series. Frank has really provided the enthusiasm, a lot of the energy. In some respects, I feel I've been along for the ride. But what's interesting here is that MIT Press, of course, is prestigious, but it's a large, slow-moving animal. It's difficult to make things happen in the context of MIT Press. And here I think Frank's energy, optimism, enthusiasm have been on very prominent display of keeping this animal moving forward. And it's taken a lot of energy to achieve this result, and I think we have managed somehow to achieve some pretty good results. And I think Frank's, all of his qualities, all of his talents that the rest of you have been talking about have been on very prominent display in the context of this effort. And then just finally, on a very personal note, Frank's collegial skills, I think, have been really valuable to me. You know, when you get to be as senior as I am in the field now, it's extremely hard to get good advice. For those of us who reach a certain level of seniority, we are generally giving advice and not getting advice. But the fact of the matter is we need advice just as much as we ever did, even when we were junior scholars. And Frank and I have had a, to me, wonderful experience of being able to give and get advice as very senior people in the field. So when Frank was producing his MIT Press book called Earth System Governance, when I looked at the manuscript, the draft of that book, I thought, you know, he needs some advice. And so I said, well, I'll give him some advice. And so I wrote some extensive comments, and he took this advice extremely well, responded constructively, and I think the manuscript, the book, is a better book as a result. But then when I was doing my book on governing complex systems, and I was developing the initial plan, initial draft, I needed advice. And Frank returned the favor. He gave me very straightforward, constructive advice for which I am exceedingly grateful. And I hope and I think that the book in its published form reflects my effort to respond to Frank's advice. And so I value to the highest degree this ability to give and get advice among senior people, which I think is a real rarity in the field. And so, I think that is, to me, just a personal favor, which I can't value highly enough. So with that, let me just add my congratulations and say, I can't think of anyone who deserves this honor at this stage more than Frank does. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Oren. My timekeeping is not the best, but actually everybody stayed on time and we still only have 5 minutes left. I might be one of the culprits for that. So of course, Artie, I think we can go a bit over time, but we need to hear from Frank. We're forced to hear from him after you. So I think from my last panel experiences, fingers crossed, 1640, if we landed that, we should still be fine. And I hope you all stay with us to hear from Artie and Frank now. So Artie, next.
Fari, I think we have another 15 minutes.
Oh, we do?
After,
Okay.
I think we've got till 45 past the hour.
Artie,
So
take all the time you need to give everything back.
Thank you very much, Fari.
Just said, it's all your time. Thanks.
Thank you. So just to clarify, I think this panel goes until 16:45, right?
Yeah, I got it totally wrong. Sorry.
Okay, no problem.
Maybe that's longer. Yeah, 4:45 at least. My bad.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. And so maybe I'll just take 30 seconds of my time to provide a little bit of context for those who may not know. So I'm, of course, on this panel because I'm a card-carrying member of the ESS section of the ISA, and I'm a scholar of global environmental politics. But I'm also Frank's wife, and I must add in the singular. Fari, when you introduced everybody, you said wives, friends, colleagues. So, but and this is also, like Philip said, this goes back some 20 years. So we are dating ourselves now, of course. But I've had a sort of ringside seat for the last 20 years on, how Frank operates, and we're in the same field. So it's been a fascinating ride. And so I think my job, rather, people have said very kind things. So my job should rather be to point to one or two things about Frank that drive me crazy. So I thought that should rather be my function. And these are, maybe I'll just point to three things, three qualities, especially two which can drive you crazy sometimes. But of course, at the end of the day, it's also what is so endearing about him. So the first one is empathy, and people have mentioned that. And it's a sort of lived empathy. It's, he doesn't just talk the talk, he walks the walk in his everyday life. And sometimes that can drive you crazy. So I thought I'd give a very small anecdote, a little illustration going way back 20 years. And this was when we were just getting to know each other. In fact, it was one of our first dinner dates, and we were sitting in this nice restaurant, and I ordered a salad, and I said to the person, could I have my dressing on the side, please? And so then I explained to Frank, I don't like to eat a salad which is drowning in dressing. So anyway, the salad arrives and it's drowning in dressing. And so the lady puts it down, she goes away, and I say to Frank, okay, I don't think I can eat this. I may have to send it back. And so this cool and calm, normally chilled out guy, he gets a bit rattled and he's like, you want to send it back? As if that was like the most outrageous thing you could have imagined thinking of doing. And he's like, they're going to have to throw it away, and they're going to have to make you another one. Can't you just eat it? And I think that can't you just eat it epitomizes Frank. He's There've been so many versions of that over the years. Can't you just manage? Can't you just ignore that? Can't you just, and that can sometimes drive you crazy. But at the same time, that's the kind of person you eventually, want to be with. And I think it's a better way to live and engage with people. And it's that deep-rooted empathy, I think. It's always cutting the other person's slack and thinking about the other person's position, which he brings to everything, including to his professional interactions. So that's the first one. The second one, and many people have mentioned it, is this die-hard optimism. And that can be, sometimes it can be very maddening as well. Everything is always fine. Everything is always great. And of course, everything is possible. So I could be lying on the sofa and, have a stomach ache or something. My father will call and say, how are you guys? And Frank will be like, oh, we are wonderful. Everything is great. We're all very happy. And I'm thinking, okay. So it's really, and it's just, as many of you have said, I mean, if there is a guy who's the glass half full person, that's Frank. It's always a real can-do attitude which he brings, and that can be super inspiring, and it's very infectious. And sometimes, you might want to offer some empirical evidence to the contrary and say, you might want to shake him sometimes and say, everything is not fine. This is actually a crappy situation. And you might want to bring some empirical evidence to bear. But that's actually not even the point. It's about where does one, you might acknowledge the sort of crappiness of the situation, but it's where does one want to focus one's attention? And it's not just a situation that he sees the best in. He sees the best in people as well. And I think it's always about seeing the good in others. And I think that's what actually also inspires people. It's not just that it's his vision that inspires others. It's his vision of what's good in them that inspires people. So I think that's also, so that brings me to sometimes his maddening optimism and his empathy. What does that add up to? In a way, and it adds up to also this, what he brings this to his vision and this outlandish ideas, dreaming big, what people have also mentioned. And seeing the glass half full, etc., doesn't mean that you ignore the injustices in the world, of course. So that's also, as Michelle was saying, both Michelle's, that there's an inherent concern with injustice, of course, in his scholarship, and his. So there's one quotable quote that's become sort of family lore, that there's this one German policy guy at some point, some colleague, who said about Frank. He says, when Frank talks, you really think the Indian trade negotiator is speaking. So he embodies this concern for justice, and so I think it's this facet of him, sometimes you really have to scratch your head and wonder, are you going to pull this off? And this is a little bit like Michelle number one was saying, this crazy outlandish idea, and that's the last thing I just want to say is, I've sort of have this ringside seat where I see how Frank will create something out of absolutely nothing. So it's just like, it's almost like magic, So if we go back again some 20 years or so, he had a half postdoc position at PIC. It wasn't even a full postdoc. And he had a few master's students who were doing their thesis with him, volunteering, and he gets elected to the German Political Science Association's executive board or something for 1-year position. And so the German Political Science Association's been there forever, it's plodding along, it's doing its thing, it has an annual meeting. And so Frank's been elected, he says, okay, so something has to happen. We have to have an international conference. And so it's not just going to be the annual meeting of the German Political Science Association. We're going to call it the Berlin Conference. And we're going to call it the Berlin Conference on the Human Dimensions of Global Environmental Change. So you're thinking, okay, so, and this is going to be, international, people are going to come. And how's it? So at the moment, it's just an idea in his head. There's no infrastructure. There are 2 master students and there's a half postdoc. And he says, well, it has to be a big thing. So I think I'm going to invite Jürgen Trittin, who's actually the German environment minister. He's going to open this conference, which at the moment doesn't exist except for in his head. And so I just have to convince Jürgen Trittin that this is the most happening event in Berlin at that moment. Once I've done that, then of course there has to be an international, so there has to be someone there to listen to the man. So, I mean, basically, long story short, he convinces the office of the German environment minister that this is an event the man really needs to be at. And then from there on, it becomes a thing, it becomes real, and the community comes, and then it becomes institutionalized. And that's just, I think, the example of, I've seen this so many times, that something, just gets created out of absolutely nothing. So my last example, and I don't know how I'm doing on time, but I will soon end, so Frank, one day, and it's before the Bali conference, it's 2004 or something, he comes out of the shower, maybe that's too much information, but we all have our best ideas in the shower, of course. He comes out one day and he says, he's just been appointed professor at the Free University in Amsterdam. He has to give an inaugural lecture. He says, I'm gonna call it Earth System Governance. So I was like, Michelle, very similar reaction. I was like, what is that? Anyway, the rest is history, as we say. So I want to just end with a little just a final remark, little anecdote. This again goes back 20 years. I was a pre-doc, and I think Kate and others mentioned we were at this global environmental assessment project together at the Kennedy School, and somebody in their wisdom decided to put Frank and me in the same office, and we were office mates. And and my mother, this middle-class, sweet Indian lady, came to visit me. And we were just office mates, and Frank, so I said, okay, we go for lunch, a 45-minute lunch. My mother's meeting Frank for the first time. And she was, I should also add, a little bit skeptical at the time about my choices in the department of, the male species. So she was a little bit like, so we are just office mates. We go for this 45-minute lunch. And at the end of this lunch, it's in a busy restaurant, 45 minutes. After that, my mother says to me, why can't you be with somebody like that? And it was just, it was just this out of the blue. And I think that epitomizes for me what Frank is. This ability, he has this inherent, this core of goodness that people anywhere around the world recognize, and whether it's a long interaction or it's a brief interaction with him. And for that, I just want to say thank you. I say thank you, Kate and Fari, and thank you, friends and colleagues, for recognizing that in my beloved Frank. Thank you. Congratulations, Frank.
Thank you.
It's beautiful. Thanks, Arti. And basically your mother's comment and meeting this wonderful person then let Arti, I didn't hear you. Sorry, you were muted. Did you want to add something? Sorry.
No, not me.
Okay. Okay. I was just saying it led to the two of you marrying actually in Las Vegas, where we would have met today. But in our hearts, we're all in Las Vegas today with the two of you. Since you mentioned ESG and Frank coming out of the shower, I just have to say that I think, again, Stefan Bauer, or maybe Philip, somebody came up with it, that there is a different acronym you can read into Earth System Governance, which is not ESG, but EasyGov. And it just reminds me, again, of Frank making it all look so easy. So a little anecdote on the side. We had very nice comments. I just want to refer to two by Ina Möller on behalf of the early career scholars of the Earth System Governance Network, or the EasyGov network, and Gustav Thungren, who's heading the International Project Office. So they send their regards, and many others who are writing in the chat. But we're coming to the final step of this big movie we had today, which is the movie of being Frank Biermann. We heard from the ringside now from Arti. It was probably the closest account, but the closest ever can only be given by the man himself, our honoree today, Distinguished Scholar Award winner, Frank Biermann. Please enlighten us. Good to be here.
Thank you so much, everybody. It was really wonderful for comments. I'm really extremely touched. I'm kind of slightly embarrassed now that the microphone is somehow in my direction now, because I was really feeling very, very honored, and just very fantastic comments and thanks about. And I'm very much taking up Michel Betzel's suggestion that we had actually a long time ago, that we all have to go to this retirement home in Bali. But I mean, I must also say to Michel and all the others, we are still busy and have to do our agenda. But this is kind of the long-term plan, is the ESC retirement home, and I'm fully much on that. I mean, for the prize, I mean, I'm extremely honored. I'm very much happy also. I'm honored because I'm part of the ESS from ISA for all my career. I mean, I still remember the day, also for the early career researchers listening here, the day in the late 1990s when I came to my first ISA conference. I was totally by myself. Nobody else was there. There were at that time also very few Europeans, and I was there kind of all by myself, presenting my first paper at an international conference, a paper that has actually never been published afterwards because someone never dared to submit it to a journal. And this was so long ago, but now I'm feeling so much part of the community, and I know so many friends and so many colleagues, and it's such a fantastic experience. So that I also very much miss now being at a reception together with all of you and have a good beer and not sitting here at the Zoom call. And many of these friendships have also started in the environmental studies section of ISA. I mean, this is really fantastic community also to get together, to meet at these ISA conferences, and to become friends and colleagues for a long time. And this is what I do with many of you who have spoken now for more than 20 years. And I'm extremely honored and very, very happy to be here today in this round table on this Zoom call. I should say maybe a few points and reactions. I mean, one is also a few things where I think maybe my trajectory has been slightly different from others in the larger mainstream community of ISA. And number one is, I think that has been mentioned also by some of you already, that I have a very interdisciplinary trajectory. I mean, I've never been in my entire life at a political science department or international relations department, or not even a social science faculty. I mean, all my life I have been in this extremely interdisciplinary earth system science, global change settings. I started my career, as Artie mentioned, in the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research. I mean, it was a very huge interdisciplinary group where they had tremendously huge computers underground and calculating the entire Earth system. And we had 200 researchers. Of those were only 2 political scientists. We were only 2 of us, in a sense. We were doing the entire governance in all of these projects. And I continued this kind of trajectory. So I was later in Amsterdam, where Philip is now Institute for Environmental Studies. And now since 2015 here in Utrecht, at the Copernicus Institute for Sustainable Development. Again, very interdisciplinary groups. We are part not of the social science faculty, but of the faculty of geosciences. And this building here, we're doing everything. We have people who study the moon. We have people who study the deepest parts of the earth. And we have our environmental governance community here, 50 people who study these governance issues. And I've done this also in all my sabbaticals and most of my visiting appointments. I've never really been a proper political scientist at a proper political science institution. I mention this also for the benefit, also for the early career researchers or others who might be here on this roundtable, that this is also fine. It's absolutely fine to be from interdisciplinary community or to work at a non-university research institution, but still be also very much part of the ISA ESE. We call it a broad community, and everybody is very much welcome here and can bring in their own perspectives on these matters, even if they're not proper political scientists from the clear communities. And the other point I think that was mentioned, I think it's something that drives me and I can't stop it. That is kind of the policy part that was mentioned by many of you. I mean, it's really, this part was a red flag flying. I stopped a long time ago, actually. But I mean, I come from a community which is very policy driven. I mean, this I did since I was a high school student and a university student in West Berlin, which was at that time certainly, let's say, I mean, today they call it progressive. At that time, we had other words for that. But and I continue this. I mean, I have lots of these papers, and some of you, they're sometimes used also in textbooks. The papers that start with the case for. So the case for the World Environment Organization, or the case for climate refugee protocol, or a paper that I did with many of you, the paper on navigating the Anthropocene, the 33 authors where we got together and wrote one paper, which was kind of the case for better or stronger system governance. And I continue this. I mean, I can't stop it that whenever there's some maybe degree of injustice or whatever it is, then the next paper will come with the case for. I mean, I now have a project on the Sustainable Development Goals, and we have a book in preparation, and we have not decided the title yet. It might be either the failure of the SDGs or the success of the SDGs, or the case for, the case against. We have not fully, but it goes in this direction. And with some of you, we are starting a new project now on geoengineering, which is an issue where I also have become very, very passionate about. I mean, against geoengineering, especially solar radiation management. So some of us are getting together and we're preparing scientific papers, and technically also more like a science policy campaign in a way to stop at least solar radiation management from becoming a normal part of research. And some of you are part of this. I'm really grateful for all your support and pushing this ahead. It's all a little bit under the radar, but at some point you will certainly get some more tweets about this. Another point, I mean, picking up from Michel Scobie, I think the North-South relationships in our community are still deserve much more attention. So that's also one part of my research. I had papers at this ISA conference on this together with Caro and Sunit. These papers on decolonizing not only the world, but also global change science, and technically also to some extent the ISA. I mean, I think there's a huge agenda out there, and we have done lots of data of editorial boards and assessments and authorships and all kind of biases that many of you know, of course. And but we want to push this forward. This is really one of my agenda for the next 10 years, to really be the pain in the ass of many of these global change communities and try to make them a more inclusive and more global community. So I mean, here for early career researchers, I think if you feel an urge, I mean, that you have to write the paper, the case for it, do it. I mean, it's not, you don't have to write only theoretical papers. You don't have to push only hypotheses around and what's the independent variable and the dependent variable. And you don't have to think about this. It's very normal and very good and very healthy that us as social scientists, that we also speak out in the open and that we're really getting active also. So I really encourage the early career researchers in particular, everybody to write also a paper, the case for. I mean, my advice is, I mean, if you write a paper in case for, then maybe also one paper against, and the case for and against are always in the balance in a sense. Especially when you write a paper, the case against something, then please also write a paper immediately afterwards, the case for something that matter. So I think that's very, very important. This also, I mean, I see also the Earth System Governance Project very much in this direction. That it is, on the one hand, it is a group of scholars, network of scholars, that's clear. I mean, we are very much scholarly. We have paper presentations, we have journals and book series with MIT. Oren has mentioned this. But on the other hand, when I talk to people there at the dinner and receptions, and we have a party at the Earth System Governance Project, it has some of these kind of social movement qualities in a sense. I mean, everybody who's there is kind of driven in a sense to change the world and to make it a better place. So it's not a purely academic community, but it's also not an NGO. It's not a purely active community. It's kind of scholars who do research, try to understand the world in a way, but also at the same time scholars who want to make it a better place, and then doing this through the research. And this is very much how I see the ESG project, maybe also different from some of the other larger networks in this field. And this comes to the point that I also can't stop. I mean, I just like to bring people together. I mean, that's kind of what some of you have mentioned. I think all of them in a sense, I think it's technically probably true. I mean, I really love it actually. It's really fun to bring people together and to do something together. I mean, I did this, I mean, what even before Artis and Phillips and Faris times, I mean, when I was a early PhD student, I organized an NGO working group on marine environmental policy, for God's sake. I mean, that was really, we brought the NGOs together and we tried to bring forward an ocean campaign. And then later we had these activities like the Berlin conference that Arti mentions. Also for early career researchers, if you are a postdoc and you have a couple of good friends and maybe some other PhD students and master students around, I mean, just do it. I mean, just organize it and call the minister. Mostly ministers don't come, but sometimes you get this one letter from the minister and you think, what? This man has actually accepted the invitation. Now we have to really get the conference going. So it's kind of, it works. I mean, just try to do it. It's a lot of fun. And it's a lot of fun also to have done it with many of you together in this various process. I mean, the Earth System Governance Project is kind of the last reincarnation of these activities that I did for 10 years with many of you. And this also very much, I mean, passion here is for the cause also, because I believe, as Peter has pointed out, the old style environmentalism. I mean, this paper has now been published now does, but I should have written this maybe 20 years ago, because this was driving me for the last 20 or 10, 15 years, that these old ideas of environment around the people is not really the way how we function. We function at the Earth system level, we function at the planetary level, and we have to develop new ways of managing our global activities in a just way, as has been pointed out, in a democratic way, and this is what we call, I don't remember the shower part, but this one, but I like to call Earth system governance, or some people also call it Earth systems governance. And I'm grateful for all of you you've been here. All of you have been part of this as the steering committee, or I mean, the Nairobi conference was organized actually by Faribos, was a fantastic conference. And Peter has been keynote speaker at our Warsaw conference. So everybody has been part in the one or the other way of this, and it was a fantastic activity. And also, I mean, yeah, I mean, I'm stepped down of this particular function, but I can't. I mean, I think Gustav Kudrun is listening here, who's our executive director of the Earth System Governance Project, and I kind of can't stop myself to emailing him from time to time and say, well, there's an interesting person there, and have you seen this interesting group, and this university is a cool place, and how about this is an interesting topic that's really coming up, and do something. Maybe we can build, expand the network, and find out interesting new solutions to emerging problems. And I'm doing this still. I mean, so I have now in the Earth System Governance Project, I mean, I'm still doing the infrastructure of the publications together with some of you, the journal, and we have 3 book series, which I'm kind of trying to be involved with. The task force on sustainable development goals we have set up, and my news is we have done a study of the membership of the Earth System Governance Project. We have 190 people in the network registered on the website who are interested in climate change. But we have no climate governance task force. This is kind of one of the things that I think is really important to organize also the Earth System Governance Project in the direction. We have many task forces, but I mean, climate change is one that has been always in the room, always very important, cross-cutting, I think. We have to also build this up. This is kind of one of my next kind of projects till the Bali ESG retirement home is coming, which I hope very much. I promised this to Michelle. She's fully right. I mean, this was a promise. This was before she stepped in the Earth System Governance Project. I mean, she got the drink. She always claimed that I put ESG in her drink, which I don't know if that's true. And the other promise was, I mean, that there will be a retirement home and at this particular location. So anyway, it was fantastic. I'm really very touched, actually. I'm very, very grateful for all of your comments. I'm grateful for Kate and Fari, that the executive committee of the ESS from ISA to have appointed me. I mean, it's a great honor. Also because it's such a large and such a very productive community. And thanks also for all the speakers today. I mean, I'm really, really touched. I have to really think about this very carefully. And when we watch the recording again at some point, to the 2 Michelles, the one Michelle with 1 L and the Michelle with 2 L's, Oren, Peter, Philip, and thanks so much also for your wonderful and your absolutely flattering comments. I must say that I'm, of course, most grateful to Arti for her comments, but also for much more. I mean, she's fully right, and we don't really talk about it that much, but we are sharing not only an academic interest, but we are actually married for 18 years. I must say that even though we are in the same field, we actually did not meet at an ISA conference. I mean, this would be probably the best romantic anecdote if you said we met at the business meeting of the ESS ISA. This is not true. So we are not a real ISA ESS couple in a way, even though we have been at many of these conferences together. We are in the same field. I'm certainly also one of the biggest admirer and biggest fans of Arti's work. And on a personal level, I must also say, I mean, Arti mentioned this moment with her mother, which I cannot really recall fully, but I can just say that the moment I met Arti was certainly one of the most wonderful moments in my life. I'm immensely grateful for all of that, and for all of that last 20 years, I'd say, and also for her comments that I didn't know, and some of these comments I should have prevented maybe otherwise, but it's all fine. So very, very grateful to you. And it is true. I mean, it's true that we married, actually, that was kind of part of this. I mean, we married in Las Vegas. It would have been so fantastic. I mean, we married, I must also say, for all my American friends who were smiling when you mentioned, I mean, so we were sober. It was not in the casino. It was not at 2 a.m. It was not spontaneous. We had thought about it before, and Elvis was not in the room. So it was just very normal wedding on that matters, but it was in Las Vegas. So it would have been really fantastic for us to be now today at a nice reception in one of these bars. I know already that all the bars that we have frequented, or last time we went to Vegas, I mean, the gentleman that we married is now a parking lot. I mean, this is also Vegas in a sense. I mean, so everything changes. And it would have been great to be there with all of you and to have a great party and a great reception and have a couple of beers. And I can only say there's the retirement in Bali, that's one. But there's also, I hope, the next ISA conference and also the next ESG conference. I mean, I hear that it might be that again online, but there will be a new conference, and there will be a new conference dinner. There will be lots of parties that we can have at these events, and I hope to see you all. And I hope you also that you all join, of course, and be part of this community in the future. I mean, and maybe the Climate Governance Task Force or the fight against geoengineering or all the other activities, because there's lots of stuff to do, and it's a lot of fun to work with all of you and to enjoy the friendship and the comments. Thanks so much for everything. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Frank. Thank you.
Standing ovation, really. Yes.
Yeah. There's a lot of film titles we could take away from this. I noted being Frank Biermann, It Depends, When I Met Your Mother, Singing in the Shower instead of Singing in the Rain, Viva Las Vegas. But the biggest one is Frank's promise that he mentioned several times now, I Can't Stop. I guess that's a Frank, I hope you feel the love, even though we're not with you, and you feel hugged across the globe with everybody participating. We're very proud of you. Kate, you had a final announcement to make.
Yes, just quickly, it sounds like the ESG retirement home will coexist nicely with the Kate and Stacy Global Environmental Politics Bar on a Beach that we have been planning. So, in the spirit of transatlantic cooperation, looking forward to that. Just briefly, please, if you have another, next in Nashville, Matt Patterson elected to be celebrated then. Hopefully we can celebrate Frank in person too. And then so if people have nominations for next year's Distinguished Scholar, we are still planning on going ahead with that. Please let myself or Graham Alt know, and we'll look forward to moving forward with that. This is my favorite time of ESS meetings. And just again, thank you, Frank, from all of us, and thank you, panelists, for your lovely remarks. And now I have the speed mentoring panel in 4 minutes, so maybe see some of you there as well. Okay, thanks again. Thanks, Fari.
Thank you all. Thank you all.
Congratulations again, Frank.
Thank you.
Lovely seeing you.
Thank you so much. Looking forward to seeing you all again.